Today's lesson is intro to CAD using OnShape. So we're mostly talking about like kind of what we do with computer-aided design and the very basics of doing it with OnShape. CAD is computer-aided design, so it is what we use to make 3D models of our parts before we build them. It's how we do all of our it's how we figure out all of the geometry of the robot. We figure out how all of the parts, like the motors and the wheels, everything, how they're going to mount, how they're going to attach, what space they take up, so things aren't like intersecting other things. We're not like having to fix and repair a bunch of little design flaws if we just like designed it on paper and we didn't take account like every little detail. So being able to do it all in 3D lets us know that like the thing we built in 3D and modeled in 3D is going to be very similar to what exists in the real world when we actually build it. Everything is completely dimensionally accurate. So if we make a 20-inch long piece of metal in OnShape, we can cut a 20-inch long piece of metal in real life, and then it'll all fit where it's going to fit, just like in the model. So that's the big advantage. So we can do a lot of things a lot faster because we're basically just like simulating being able to build everything and creating all of these things very, very quickly without having to like test it all and waste a lot of material. And it's really nice right now because we can do it virtually and we can do it remotely together. And that's one of the big advantages of OnShape, as we'll go through and kind of do an intro to OnShape, is that it's all through the web browser. Okay, so the simplest form of what we're doing in a CAD program is we're going to create 3D objects. The first step to creating our 3D objects is to make a 2D sketch of them. So very similar to any sort of drawing software you've used before, right? Even like PowerPoint or Google Slides, or you can like draw squares, you can draw circles. The big difference here is you're able to add dimensions. So these lines that say 3 and 2, these are going to be in inches. OnShape doesn't show the default units here, so it's fine. But this is 3 inches and 2 inches, so we know exactly how big this object is. So if we wanted to change it, we could go in and like click on these lines, and we could put a 2 here, and then we'd have a 2x2 square instead of a 3x2 rectangle. So we make all of these sketches, and we make sure the sketch is exactly what we want from one view of the part, right? So we basically pick 2 of the dimensions. Say we're looking at like the side of this rectangle, right? Which we're gonna make it into a 3D rectangular prism in a second. But when we're drawing it, we look at it from one view. So we look at it from the side. And then the next step is we basically tell the CAD program how we want to add height to it. So we've given it a length and a width. And then we're going to add some height. So we can tell it, this one didn't show the dimension, but this is 1 inch. So it's basically, it's adding 1 inch of height to our part. So then we have a 3D object instead of just the 2D sketch. From there, after we've added height, you can basically use that same pattern of sketching and then adding features. So either adding or removing material. So here we can make another sketch. Say we can draw a circle. So 1 inch diameter circle. It's right in the middle of both faces here. So it's right in the middle of this rectangular prism. And then we can tell OnShape, do we want to add material or remove material? So in this example, we're going to remove material. So this would be like drilling a 1 inch hole going right through this block. And so we end up with a part that was a rectangular prism with a hole in it, right? So you can imagine that we would be able to do a lot more features. So we could have holes going into different sides. We could sketch something and make it bigger. So you can add material, you can take away material. You can round all the corners. Anything you can do with a physical part, there's a way to do in OnShape to your model of your part as well. But you can do it a lot faster when you're not actually having to do the drilling or anything, and you can lay everything out and make sure it's going to work ahead of time. Okay. Okay, a little bit weird, but okay. So if you haven't already, this link right here, which is in the chat, is onshape.com/education plan, and that's how we're going to create an account to be able to log in and use OnShape. And I'm going to walk through some of the navigation and kind of this simple process right here of making this block to begin with, and then we'll talk about engineering drawings, and we'll make a part that, or make a part similar to what was on one of our robots before after we do that. So once you log into OnShape, feel free to start creating an account if you don't have one right now. Do it while I'm talking, it's fine. If not, you can come back and watch the recording of this. If you just want to watch for now, that's fine too. Once you're here, you should get to kind of your main screen. You won't have any files listed if you haven't created anything. But so the first step is just to create a new document. So everything in OnShape is housed in these documents. And each document can hold multiple parts. It can hold a full like robot inside of a single document if you want. You can name it whatever we need. My caps lock's on. Okay. Part 2. Okay. So, because I already had a part 1 close testing earlier today. Once you're in your part, this is kind of what you see. So this space in here is your main like design space for any parts that you create. We're in what's called a part studio. You don't need to worry about exactly where you're making things or anything yet. We're just kind of look at it simply. And this defines kind of what we're looking at in terms of like a 3D space. So if you scroll with your mouse wheel, if you scroll away from you, it zooms in. If you scroll back towards you, it zooms out. Whatever area of the screen your cursor is in, it will sort of zoom into that area. So if I zoom in, it kind of gets closer to that right side. If I zoom in over here, it gets closer to the left. Your right mouse button rotates. So if you click the right mouse button and move the mouse around, you can rotate the view of the world. So we have a nice empty world here. It's just showing some of the planes and kind of the origin, which is that middle spot right there. Just like you'd have an origin in algebra when you were graphing and things, right? You had where your zeros are for your X and Y. Over on the top right, we have what's called the view cube. So the view cube is super useful. It allows you kind of navigate the world a little bit. You click in the corners and get like a corner view, click on the front and you get a view of just the front. So you can click around a little bit in the view cube to see exactly what part of an object you want, or look at however you need to view anything. So the first thing we're going to do is that step 1 of our process, which is to 2D sketch. So we are going to grab the sketch tool. So up in the top left, there's a button that says sketch. And then we have to tell it basically where do we want to start drawing. So the easiest of the 3 options are one of these 3 flat planes. So we could either draw from the top, we could draw from the front, or we could draw from like the side. For this object, let's go ahead and just draw from the front. So we can click on front. And once you do that, it brings up this other little rectangle and it says sketch 1 right there. And you could start drawing, but that's a little weird because we're not quite looking at, we're not like looking straight on at the place we're going to sketch, right? So one of the easiest things to do here is to use the right mouse button and click, and it pulls up the little context menu. And one of those options is view normal to sketch plane. So normal to basically just means you want to look straight at whatever you're looking at, right? Where our eyes are kind of pointed straight at it. And so now we're looking straight at our sketch plane. All these other planes are kind of in our way right now, even the front plane. So in OnShape, what you can do is you come over to the left, we have our feature tree. So this is where everything we do is kind of documented. So we have our sketch here. As we do more sketches, they'll all get listed out. As we do, as we cut through any parts, or if we do what's called extruding, which we're going to do in a second, which is how we add height to a part, all of that is going to get listed out over on this left side. And it also shows some of the things. So it shows like the planes and it shows the origin. And next to them, they have this little eyeball. And if we just click on it, we can hide them. So if we don't want to see our planes, we can hide all of those things. And now we just have a nice open area for us to sketch. We're going to sketch a rectangle. So we can click the corner rectangle tool. There are a variety of ways to, or there are a couple of different ways to create a rectangle. So you can either do it by corners, or you can draw the center and then one corner. Corner rectangle is kind of the default for most people, where you can just click, drag around, and then click it again. So now we have a rectangle, but we haven't set the dimensions. So the dimensions are kind of listed here, but we haven't actually told them exactly what they should be. The way that we do that is with the dimension tool. So up in kind of like towards the end of the toolbar over on the right, there's this dimension tool. OnShape's really nice. If you leave your cursor over something, it'll tell you what it does and kind of how to use it. So if you're not sure how to do something, you can just leave your mouse there and it will pop up and give you instructions, which is super convenient. So if we click that dimension tool and then we click any of the sides of the rectangle, we can pull up and we can get the length of that side. And now we have a little box that we can type into. It tells us that we're in inches. It has that IN there for inches. And we're going to make a 3-inch long rectangle. So I just type 3 and hit enter. And now my rectangle shrunk down. OnShape was smart enough to shrink it down in proportion, right? So you saw like these sides changed a little bit too, even though we haven't told them what it's going to be. It kind of did it by proportion for us. But now we can go ahead and tell it what our other side length is going to be. So we can click that one, bring it out. We still have the dimension tool selected. If for some reason it didn't work and you didn't bring that out, you can just click dimension again and pull it out for you. So I'm going to click there. We're going to do a 3x2 rectangle. So I'm going to do 2 inner, and now we have a 3x2 rectangle, and it's fully dimensioned, right? So if I want to get out of this, so right now I'm still in the dimension thing. If I click on a line, I'm still dimensioning. So if you want to get out of a tool at any point, you use the escape key up at the top left of your keyboard. And now I'm back to my normal cursor and I can click and drag things around. So I can move the rectangle around, but I can't actually change its size at all, right? It just moves with what I'm doing. If you wanted to make it to where you couldn't even move it, I could bring the origin back. So I could unhide the origin. I could take one of the corners of the rectangle and plop it right down there on the origin. And now you saw like all those lines turn to black, right? So if they're black, that means they are what's known as fully defined, and I can't drag it around anymore. So I can click them and it won't let me move them at all. So before I could move that rectangle, now I can't move that rectangle anymore. Okay, so we have our 3x2 rectangle, and the next step of our process is adding height to it. To do that, we're going to use the extrude button up here in the top left. It's also Shift E, so it also, OnShape will give you all the keyboard shortcuts for each of the buttons if they exist right next to it. So it's really fast. So as you're learning, you click the button, use the buttons for as long as you want, and then slowly you'll start figuring out what those keyboard shortcuts are, and you can get a lot faster if you start using those. So we can click extrude. OnShape automatically assumes we're in the sketch, and it did something, but we can't quite see it because we're just looking straight on. So it's hard to see the height. So if we come up to the view cube and we click there, now we can start seeing that OnShape is trying to give us some height here and trying to make this object 3D. So it told us it's already set up as 1 inch, but if we wanted to, we could make it a lot bigger. So we could make a 20-inch rectangle, right? Now SolidWorks is going to give us this big 20-inch rectangle. If we wanted to, we can go back down to 1. You can flip the direction of which way it's going. So for this, it doesn't really matter. We just need it to be taller, but for some parts, maybe you have something else already CADed and you want it to go the other way. This little arrow right here lets you flip those directions. And once you're finished, you can just click that green check mark. And now we have our rectangle. So this would work the same if we wanted to make a cylinder or a triangular prism. Any shape you can draw, you can add height to it really fast, really easy with the extrude tool. The next step in our process is to do more sketches, right? So we're basically just going to do that same pattern again, that we already just did. So we're going to use the sketch button again, but instead of clicking on one of our planes, we're going to click directly on the side of the rectangle that we want to draw on. So if there's some side of the object that you want to add something or remove something from, we just click right on it. We're going to use the view normal, the sketch plane button again, which we can do right there. And now we're drawing on this side of the object. It tells us we're in a sketch. Kind of all of our tools change to the, we have all the sketch tools ready to go. So we're going to draw a circle. There are a few different ways to have OnShape kind of help you locate it. So you could just draw a circle somewhere, but if we want it directly in the center, we then have to like move it. We can let OnShape help us out. So I hit escape to get out of the tool and I'm gonna go back to it. So I'm gonna hit the circle again. And I know I want it to be on the center of this side. So if I kind of drag my mouse over this line, it'll pop up that little box. And that little box tells me I am in the center. And I can drag down. And so now I know that this center line exists. Then I'm gonna come over here and kind of do the same thing with my mouse and get that center line. And then when I drag over, it pops it right there. And I can see that I am dead center in this rectangle. And I can drag out my circle to whatever size I want for now. And I'll come back with the dimension tool to click on the circle and let me tell it how big it's going to be. So I can type in 1 inch. And then I can hit escape to get out of the dimension tool. And you can also drag these dimensions around. So if they're in your way, if you're trying to draw and it's not quite where the line wants to be, right? Maybe you want it over on the left, you can drag those around and position them where you want so they're out of your way. Then once we do that, we can pop back into our side view. And we can go back and tell it to extrude again. So now it's trying to add material, right? Because I told it to extrude, so it's trying to add. But in OnShape, you just use the same tool. So you click extrude, and we can do remove instead. So it's just another simple button. We swap it to remove, and now it's going to actually take out the center of our part. And we're just going to hit the check mark again, just like we did before. And now we have this part ready to go if this was what we were making for some reason. But this is likely just one step in the process, right? Maybe we needed to make holes that go through it the other way because we're going to mount this to something. And then maybe there's a rod that spins through here, right? There's all sorts of things that you could make this part for. But once you know your use case and you kind of have a design idea in mind, you can create enough sketches and extrusions to get that done. Let's see, if you realize you made a mistake or if you want to change something, you can just come over to the feature tree on the left and you can delete a feature. So if I delete this extrude, it takes me back to having that sketch. You can, I could delete this one too, and now we're back to just having this rectangle. If I end up realizing, oh, this rectangle shouldn't be 3x2, instead it should be 3x4, and I got one of those dimensions wrong. If you right click on sketch and hit edit, now I'm kind of back in this sketch. I can do view normal to again, and I can just change this to a 4, hit enter, my rectangle got bigger, and once I hit this check mark, it kept the extrusion, but now the rectangle is just a bigger size, right? So you can kind of go back in time a little bit, make some edits, and everything that happened before it is still going to work if it still can, right? You can even do a few other things. So if I did view normal to sketch, I could draw my circle in this sketch if I wanted to. So I could come here and I could draw a 1-inch circle in the same sketch. And now I did kind of two things at once, right? I drew the rectangle and I put the hole in the middle, all from that initial sketch. So it just depends on if you want to start adding things, you can get a little bit more efficient that way sometimes, but maybe if it needs to change, maybe you need to do it a different way. So one of the takeaways is there are multiple right ways to do the same thing in CAD. Some of them may be a little faster, some of them may be a little easier, but as you go, you may have to pick and choose which way you want to do something. Maybe having multiple sketches is useful, maybe it's not. And a lot of it is just preference, but sometimes it is faster or easier to do it one way than the other. And as you learn, you'll figure out which ones are faster, which ones are easier, and which ones you like more. Okay, I think I got all of those. There's multiple intro videos and things which we can look at as we go. But one of the things I want to look out first is actually making a part for one of the parts on our actual robot. So this was a piece that we 3D printed. I took a couple of the features out of it. One second. Let me attempt to make something bigger. Maybe not. All right, now we can see all the dimensions. Okay, so this was a part from our 2019 robot. We basically built these little 3D printed blocks that our intake, when it was deployed, they would hit, so they would deploy at the right angle, because we realized at one point we could go a little too low, and we didn't want to do that. So these are the blocks we made, and so this right here is what we call a drawing, and it gives us the dimensions of the part, and it has multiple views of the part. So like this up here in the top left, you can see this is the 3D view, and this is here to help us kind of understand what's happening in 3D. And then these other three views are from looking at it directly from three different sides. So this one over here in the bottom left is if we were staring just straight at this side of the part. Over here, as we come over, it's as if we're looking straight at the back of the part. So you can see like this rectangle, it's just a rectangle, and it's just this height when we're looking at it straight from the back. And this one above it is if we're looking straight down on the part, right? So you can imagine this is a rectangle, and you have these 6 holes here spaced the way they are. Even though it's kind of angled, if you were looking straight down, you wouldn't actually be able to tell that it was angled if you were looking perfectly straight down. So one of the things we have to start doing is, as you get better at CAD, you get better at spatial reasoning, so that you can understand kind of, you could just take these 3 drawings here, and you should be able to create this 3D interpretation of it if you wanted to, right? You could sketch this and get pretty close from what these 3 things look like. You should be able to get pretty close to what this looks like. So for our example, we're going to go ahead and make this in OnShape really fast. So it should not take very long. I'm going to go ahead and use the same window I was already in. You could go and make a new part if you wanted to. I'm just going to go ahead and delete the sketch and extrude. We haven't done that much. And I'm going to show the side of the part, because that's where we're going to start our sketch. So I'm going to click on the right side. So now we're kind of looking at this right side, which is the same thing as we're just kind of viewing it just like we're viewing this side here. Anytime we're making something, especially if we already have a kind of specific dimensions given to us, or maybe we have the part in real life and we're taking measurements from it and we're trying to create it in CAD, one of the things you have to do is you have to think about, how do you want to start creating the part, right? For something like this, we could, in theory, we could start from the back here. We could just create this rectangle. We could extrude it a certain width. We could come back through and we could like cut out a triangle up here if we wanted to. We could put the holes in. You could also start from the bottom and go up. There's all sorts of ways you can start and finish this. This side view has enough dimensions here that I think it's easy enough to start it this way. So we can do a single sketch of this, and we'll get the kind of main form of the part. Will all be driven by this sketch. And then we'll come back and we'll add the 6 holes in a separate sketch and a separate remove. So we're gonna draw a new sketch. So we're gonna click the sketch button like we did before. We're gonna click on the plane, so I have that right plane visible. And then I can hide the right plane once I did that. And I'm just gonna use the line tool to draw these. So I'm just gonna draw out a line. OnShape does a pretty good job of snapping you straight. So if you don't hit any other buttons or anything and you're just drawing, as I move my cursor up, as long as I'm close, it'll force me to be drawing a straight line. which is super convenient. So most of the time we want to draw straight lines. We very rarely want to draw a line ever so slightly not straight, right? It would be really tricky to try to draw like a line somewhere between those two lines. So it's very handy for OnShape just to give us that nice snap, and we know we're drawing a straight line. Same thing happens with going up. I can come in and do that. We can come over. If I kind of like select this, it'll let me just drag it straight up, and now I know I'm straight above that line already. And I can come back down with my last line. And now I have a shape reasonably close to, it looks about right, right? That's kind of what you want to do when you're starting. You just want to get it looking kind of close, and then you add in all the dimensions. So I'm going to come back to my dimension tool like we did before, and we're going to click through some of these dimensions. So we have a 1.632 inch long bottom. So I can type 1.632, hit enter, and do the same thing for the two sides. So 1.278 and 1.883. So, so this gave us this angle here, but if we know that these are all perpendicular and we have these three lengths, there's no way for this to be any other length or angle than it already is. So we don't need to go ahead and try to CAD this. If we do try to dimension it, so if I click here and then I click here, it'll let me do it. And we can type that in, but it shows it up as that light gray color, right? That's because it's already defined. So if I were to try to edit this, it won't let me. So I can't click through this and make this a different number. And that should be basically what that is. Yeah, it rounded a little differently. That's probably because these may not be, so in our drawing, it only shows us 2-3 decimal points, but if these were longer, this would be slightly different. We're not going to worry about that 0.01 of a degree. We can basically just assume that's like rounding error, basically. From there, we're going to add its height, right? So we're going to add that third dimension, which is the length along here. So it's this size right here. So it's that 1.75. So we're going to use that same extrude tool. We can make ourselves look at it so we can actually see what's happening. And inside that box, we're going to go 1.75. And then you can either hit, we can force that in, and then we just hit the checkbox. So this is a new shape. So we're just doing new. We're not adding to anything. Nothing existed before. So you use the new side, and we click the check mark. So now we have the majority of this shape. All we don't have are these little things in here, the little pattern of holes. So we're going to draw those by making sure we're kind of looking at, let's see, we can make sure we're looking at the same way. So, excuse me, so this is looking at the top with this on the side. So I'm a little off here, right? So this is how it looks in that picture, and we're going to draw it on the bottom because the bottom's flat, right? So if I wanted to draw it at the top, it would get a little bit harder because my holes, when I went to cut them, it would be really hard to get them at the right angle. So we're going to invert that a little bit, and we're going to do it from the bottom here. So I'm going to do a sketch on that. Normal to sketch again. And so now we can draw in our circles. There are definitely ways to do all of these things faster than the way I'm doing it right now. I don't actually think I gave a dimension for that circle, so that's fun. So those are somewhere around 0.2 circles, so I'm going to call them 0.2 for this. So we're going to bring out one and dimension it and make it 0.2. It's a very common hole size for us on our robots. And then we can select all of these, and what am I looking for? There we go. So we're just going to tell them all to be equal, which is right here. So it has this like E thing. So you can set up these relations between different sketch entities. So I tell them all to be equal. They're all going to be the same hole size. And I can do the same thing over to these ones. I could have selected all 6 at the same time. That would have worked too. And I can just click equal, except, yeah, there they go. So it updated. So now all 6 of these have the same diameter. But they're not in the right locations yet, right? So we got to figure out how to put them all in the right location. So we're going to use that dimension tool, and we can click on a line, and then we can click on the center of the circle, and we can tell it how far away we want them to be. So this one's going to be 0.25, because that's the dimension. You can kind of see where the arrows are pointing. That's the dimension from the center of this circle to the edge right there. So we have 0.25. And you can see because of the way I drew it, this one automatically moved too, because it was automatically like keeping those centered. It may not be true for all of them if I didn't draw them all correctly. We may have to go through and edit a couple of those things. But you can get a little bit faster with kind of using, SolidWorks will do some assumptions for you and help you out. Or sorry, OnShape will. Okay, so another dimension here was 0.75. And our last one, which should be 1.25. Yeah, so all 3 of these holes are basically a 1/2 inch apart. So you can figure out they're all dimensioned from this one side. But if you were to take, say, the dimension of the center of this hole and subtract the one from this hole, if you do 0.75 minus 0.25, you can see how far apart they are, which in this case would be a 1/2 inch, 0.5. All right, so we have those 3 semi in place. We need one more dimension, right? So we've only told them how far away they are from this wall. We haven't told them how far away they are from a second wall. So this one right here, this 0.375 is the dimension we need to add. So we'll do that same thing, click the line, click the circle, and type 0.375. So these ones didn't move, right? So we can figure out why, and we can do a couple things to make them, oops, the wrong button. So we can select all of these, and we should be able to make them horizontal. Ooh, nope, I did something wrong. Okay. We can click the relations and delete out the relations. Let's see, is this vertical? There we go. So depending on how you're rotating, and sometimes I get it, it's easy to get confused, but if one doesn't work, the other one probably will. Basically, the OnShape thinks that this is the vertical plane, so we're just kind of rotated 90 degrees, which does happen sometimes. These ones are mostly in place too. This one got a little bit off, so I can tell it to be horizontal now, so it knows that one's there. This one I can move around too, which I don't want, so I'm going to select that one and make them horizontal. This last one had some movement, so we can do that one too. Okay, so now all of these, I believe, nope, that one still didn't do it. Okay, let's try that again. Okay, so now these shouldn't be able to move. Yeah, so I can't drag any of those anymore. And our final dimension here is 1.375 from this far wall. So these are an inch apart. So we're going to do that. And we can do it here. We could put these as an inch apart if we wanted. You could also do the 1.375. It really doesn't matter as long as you get the right dimension. All right, because if I draw a dimension from here to here now, it's still going to show up as being the right dimension. It's going to be grayed out because I've already basically dimensioned it by having these two be added together. From there, our last move is just to remove that material. So we click the extrude button. We can rotate a bit. And so, yeah, that's definitely not the part we want. We don't want this thing to have a bunch of legs. We want to remove material. And then we have to tell it how far we want to remove, right? So if we leave it right now, it's only removing an inch up into our stopper block, but we want it all the way through because this is where we put some bolts to bolt it into the robot. So we're going to tell it where to go. So we could just tell it to go longer, which works. So we could tell it to be like 3 inches, and now all of them go all the way through and we have our holes on top. We can also use this little option right here where it says blind, and we can choose from a variety of different choices, but one of them is up to next, and that lets you cut just up to the next like face that it runs into. So in this case, it's going to run into this angled face, and each of them are going to go all the way through the angled face. And we can hit that check mark. And now we have, hopefully, roughly that same picture right here in our CAD program. So we physically made this part. There's a couple other things we did to it to make it a little bit easier to mount. We rounded some of these edges so it would print nicer and wouldn't be as sharp. But basically, this is the exact part that helped our robot do so well in 2019. Okay. Let's see. So there is a lot more to learn. So there's clearly, this was just intentionally just a very beginning intro to what CAD is. We'll have more lessons and examples, and I'll have some assignments for people to do as we're getting through. But one of the nice things about OnShape is they built out a very thorough kind of lesson plan and videos and projects and things to do to kind of learn to get started. So these links take you through their specific kind of trainings, which are very useful. There's also a website, OnShape for FRC, which goes into a lot of the very specific items for FRC specifically. So once you kind of get super used to using OnShape to design basic parts and do kind of their useful tutorials at the beginning, we can go through and get how to do a lot more of the FRC specific things. So how do you add motors and make FRC specific parts and all of the different things we can buy and all the parts that we use in FRC, how do you import them really quickly? There's some other like handy calculators and other stuff on that website that get you designing the robot parts a lot faster. So once you're a little bit more advanced, you can head over there and do some of the things. But for people who really want to learn more and get a jump start without just following along on the projects that we're going to be doing, this is definitely the progression of the learning pathways to do. Like if you get through them, you'll be able to do a lot of things very quickly, and there's a lot more that you're able to do on the team once you can kind of get through some of this stuff and learn it. And as you're going, there's totally fine to ask questions. We have all of our sessions every day at 3, where it's just kind of our socializing chit chat time. There's a great time to ask questions. Be like, hey, I was working on OnShape. I was doing this thing the video said to do, and I didn't quite understand why. Happy to answer them then. But once you can do a lot of the CAD, once we are back in the lab, that's how we're able to design things to be 3D printed. That's how we're able to design things to be laser cut. Everything on our robot, basically, almost every single piece of our robot gets CADed before it actually gets made in any way and goes on the robot. So CAD and design are really critical to every part of our assembly process and design process.